Well, g'day everyone.
Are we on?
Yes, we're on, Luke.
Cool.
My name's Fletcher,
And I'm Mahe.
and we are from the Maps API team based in Sydney, Australia.
Yep, and welcome to this talk about designing Maps applications for usability on mobile and desktop. So,
Cool.
little housekeeping.
Little bit of housekeeping. You've probably seen this in all the talks you've been to this morning. There's a link here to Speaker Meter, so we can get some feedback from the audience on the talk. You know, you might want to talk about things like Luke's haircut, how fat he is, these sort of things. And of course, these are the Twitter hashtags to use for this session.
So, cool.
Cool.
All right, so a little overview about what we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk a bit about what is user experience.
Yeah, because we're going to be talking about, the title of the talk is about usability, but that's about how the user actually experiences your site. And we'll go into a bit of detail about what that means.
Some of the differences between desktop and mobile, not just how people interact with them, but there are fundamental differences between the two.
Exactly. So we're talking about use cases and technical limitations and so forth.
And then we'll talk a bit about the pain points, what are some common things you might run into, and then hopefully offer some suggestions on how to fix it.
Exactly. So this is going to be the main thrust of our talk. We're going to identify a set of things that people can often do wrong when it comes to user experience. And these are things that can really make the user experience suck. And we want to identify them and work through some ways that you can mitigate them.
Yeah. So firstly, Jez, what is user experience?
Well, user experience, we're talking about everything to do with the way the user interacts with your application. So this is everything from the user interface, the way things are laid out, how they actually activate your site, and so forth like that. But it's also more subtle things. And it's to do with how your users actually go about solving the problem that they came to your site with.
So firstly, it's about respecting the intent of the user. They've come to your site for a reason. They may have a problem, but you respect that and will deliver them a solution for them.
Exactly. They've come there expecting to be able to do something, and you have to respect that and be able to give them a solution, which takes us to our next point.
Yes. Don't give them a problem, give them a solution.
Exactly. Now, they've already got a problem, right? That's why they're at your site. You might have something, you want to track ponies, you want to do something else with a mapping application, right?
But if they can't find those ponies,
then they've got another problem, right? And they've already got a problem, so you've got to give them the solution to their problem.
And ensure that their experience matches their mental model. They have an idea in their mind when they come to your site what they want, and we should match that and keep the experience flowing for what they want.
Exactly, and this is particularly important for a mapping application because people have pretty fixed ideas about what they mean, what they're going to get into when they've got a mapping application. And so you've got to make sure that you match up with their expectations and how they think about things in their head with how they're actually going to interact with your application.
Yeah. And then it's about how does that intent relate to a mapping application?
Right, so we've talked a lot about intent now, and we've talked about respecting the intent and making sure that we can solve the problem of the user. But we need to work out now what we mean by intent when we're talking about a mapping application.
Especially between desktop and mobile.
Exactly.
So with that, we should talk a bit about what is desktop, how is it used, and some of the difference between that and mobile.
Exactly.
So desktop is usually used for planning. You don't carry your desktop around with you. It's a bit big. So it's more about figuring out...
I saw you carrying your desktop around once.
Yeah, that
30-inch
monitor.
I think you were stealing it.
Yeah, well, it's probably yours.
Yeah, I think so. I did miss my computer for a while there, so...
So it's about planning. It's about kind of figuring out what you want to do. You don't mind sifting through information. Usually you're on a comfy couch. You don't mind getting a bit more sent to you to evaluate the options and then kind of make a decision.
Exactly. You've got a lot more sort of power with a desktop, so you can show the user a lot of different options and give them things that they can evaluate.
But then on mobile, it's more about immediacy. It's about now. I'm out in the world, walking around, and I've got a question. It's usually where I am. You've got the context that the phone can provide, with the location and that sort of stuff. So it's using that to enrich their experience and solve that.
Exactly, and we're moving here from a planning, a sort of passive stage when you're on a desktop application to an active stage when you go to the mobile device. It's immediate. It's about immediacy.
Yeah. So But those are just how you kind of interact with the two. But there are some fundamental differences between desktop
Right,
and mobile.
and these are things that, they're pretty simple things. They're things that you would think about when you're thinking about making a desktop app compared to a mobile app. But it's good to go through them because often it's really easy to just overlook one of these things and to make a site that works great for a desktop but just does not translate at all for a mobile.
And those things are like, whether the person's using a mouse or a touch device, you could use mouse tooltips when you hover over them. You can change the cursor icon, but you can't really do that on a mobile device.
Exactly, and it's things like not expecting that you're going to get a mouse over event when you're clicking on an item if a user is using a touch device.
Yeah, things like the screen size. Obviously, the screen size is vary dramatically between desktop and mobile, and the resolution as well.
Exactly, and this is probably the most fundamental thing. It's about screen real estate. You just don't have as much space to display things on a mobile device. And we'll go through a number of examples where that becomes apparent.
Yeah, and then bandwidth, obviously. The phones especially, here they have unlimited data, but when we're in Australia, it costs us money.
I know.
So it's a bit rude when you start sending me 5 meg images of ponies on my phone.
And I have to pay for that.
Yeah, I know.
He keeps sending me these photos of ponies, and it's just chewing through my data quota every month.
You like ponies?
I like ponies, but not that much. Not the amount you send me.
It's a lot of ponies. And then it's about location. Your desktop does, you can kind of get to within a city range usually on desktop, but on the mobile device you can get to within a couple of meters. So
and of course, this takes us back to our active versus passive thing, right? It's the use case and the capabilities of the mobile.
And then processing power, your phones usually have a lot less, so think about what you're going to be doing on the phone, what data you're going to be sending down, and then what you're actually going to do with it compared to what you can do on the server.
So a key point of our talk today is if you do things naively, then you can actually really hurt yourself when you go to a mobile environment. So something that might be really nice, have a lot of nice graphic transitions and so forth on a desktop, might just slow down the phone to the point that it's not usable.
And lastly, cache. You can't expect someone on the phone, it's got a lot less cache, to have everything that you sent to them last time still there. So it's kind of being smart about what you store on the phone, what you send down, and kind of thinking about what you're doing.
Okay, cool.
So, Jez, why do we care?
Why do we care? So we've talked a lot. We've given you a lot of platitudes so far about you have to have good user experience, what user experience means, and what are some of the things that can problem. But the question is, why do we care, Luke?
Because?
Well, that's not really an answer, right?
It's my answer to everything.
It's your answer, but you're kind of lazy and you don't really have a good answer. So I've got a better answer for us.
Okay, how about this?
So the answer is if the user experience sucks, then the users aren't going to come back. Now you might have a really great site, like
Ponies.
Luke and his pony site. It might be the greatest, premise ever. But if people can't actually use that to track their ponies or whatever they're intending to do, then they're not going to come back. They might go there, trying to do this, and they just get frustrated with it, so they go, well, I'm never going back there.
And now they've got another problem. And
now they've got
we don't want to give them more problems.
Exactly.
So keeping that in mind, we'll be talking about, if is done badly, then the user experience sucks.
Okay, so we've got to identify some things that if they are done badly, we're going to make the users frustrated. We're going to make the user experience suck.
So firstly, the layout, Jez. If the layout is done badly, the user experience sucks. And what do we kind of mean by the layout?
Well, the layout's probably the most obvious thing you think of when you think of user experience, right? It's to do with how things are put on the page, how you actually represent things. And some of the problems that a bad layout can give you is clutter. People don't like seeing a cluttered web page. And so if they immediately see a thing that has a million different things, controls all over the place and the map not set up the way it's meant to be, then they're going to get frustrated.
Yeah. And then kind of moving buttons around is shifting things between when someone did something and then they look at it again. It's kind of just being smart, being consistent and doing those sort of things.
And so some key things to think about when you're thinking about desktop versus mobile here. On a desktop, because you've got the screen real estate, you've got this space, you can generally have the map and the content that you want to display on the map all in the same place.
Yeah, and you can break out the content. You can display more. You can give users the ability to dive in and kind of filter and just expand and explore their environment.
And on mobile, you really have to make the choice, right? You can have the map because you need the map. You're a mapping application. But you've got to show the content in a clever way so that you're not going to clutter up the map when you're there. A classic example of this, and we'll have some examples of it in a sec, is an info window. Yeah. So on a desktop, an info window is a great way to show context and content. But on a mobile device, it just really, really sucks.
Yeah, and we'll show that. So here is maps.google.com.
So we're using this as an example of what we think is a good user experience. And we think maps.google.com is a good user experience because, we work for Google, so if we didn't, we probably shouldn't be given this talk right now. Yeah,
exactly. So this is maps.google.com. You can see it's a desktop version. So we use up the whole real estate. You've got a big map, kind of zoomed out so you can see the whole world because you want to be able to explore. So we've got room for content on the left. You've got the search bar always at the top. And you just got everything kind of just spaced out nicely so you can see everything.
This is getting at that kind of mental model thing. This is how users expect to be able to interact with the map. Having the search bar always available, no matter what you're doing with the map, is great because that's what people are there to do. They're there to search. They're there to interact with it.
So then if we look at the same thing on the mobile device, it's kind of the same, just a bit simplified.
And so what we see here is that we've taken the map, we've zoomed it in a lot because we've got a lot more context, of course.
We know where they are, so we might as well just bring the map as close as they can go because that way they don't have to send as much data, they don't have to pan around as much, and we're just respecting their intent.
Exactly.
And then if we move along to actually showing data on the map, you can see we've got the results on the left, you can scroll up and down, you can have more, got the map on the right, we've got tooltips when you hover over them, it's just a lot more content.
And this is because we're in this planning stage, remember. We want to show the users a lot of content, we want to give them a lot of options because they're evaluating different alternatives about what they're trying to do.
But if we move this to the mobile, you can see the content is still there. We did the search, we found all our results, they're there, but we're just given more options to kind of get what we want rather than being bombarded with everything.
Exactly. So let's move to the info window example. And we'll see here, this is the classic info window. It's great when you're in the planning stage because it's giving you a lot of information very quickly.
And it looks pretty.
It looks pretty. We like the look of our info window. So we've got the thumbnail there. We've got a summary of the review status, the website.
Connects to the marker.
It connects to the marker, so you've got the context, of course, And of course, all of the results still on the left-hand side there.
And when we do the same thing on the mobile, you see, instead of filling the whole screen with an info window where you can't kind of figure out what you just clicked on, we'll just pop it up at the bottom. You can relate it to the marker, so we just clicked on B, so we'll show B down below. And because we're in the active stage, we're going to give options of calling and giving directions, because that's more what you're going to be doing.
Exactly. This is key about respecting the intent of the user. If someone's out and they're searching for a particular business, one of the things they're probably likely to want to do is to find the phone number and call it.
Yeah. Or get directions.
Or get directions there.
So moving on, so if the data representation is done badly, the user experience, like what do you mean by that, Jez?
Well, so this is where we're adding value to the map, right? So this is, besides the map itself, this is adding, the content, the information that you have that you want to display graphically on the map. And again, one of the key things that can go wrong if you do this badly is clutter. And this kind of gets back to our concept of doing things naively. If you do things naively, then you end up making a sucky user experience.
Yeah, and like showing too much data. It's just easy. I like getting all my data and putting on the map and don't have to think about it.
I know, but we already know that you're lazy, right?
So, and it's also about not giving them the information they want.
Exactly.
We don't want to load the entire world and send it down to them if they're not really interested in the entire world.
Exactly. And the other key point that you can do when you're representing data is breaking their mental model of the data. If they have a particular expectation about how this data is going to be represented, if you give them a really weird way of doing that, then they're going to be disconnected with it and it's going to frustrate them.
So I got a little demo here. This is a little project I've been working on. Do you know what country this is?
Yeah, that's Australia. That's what we are.
What do you reckon of my little project?
See, I don't know what to say. Look, that's just terrible. What are we even looking at there?
This is every public toilet in Australia.
Okay, so I can see why you might need that data. It's potentially in a hurry, but that's just not useful for me. I'm looking at that, it's obstructing the entire map. What are you thinking?
Okay, I suppose we could think about it more. We could do something a bit more like this.
Okay, so this is a bit more interesting, right? This is showing us, what's this showing us?
This is essentially clustering all that information. So instead of just displaying every mark in the world, we'll just replace that with just icons that represent how much data is there.
Okay, cool. So we can see that, around Sydney and so forth, we've got about 3,500 public toilets.
You visited almost all of them?
Yeah, it's very important to me. So what if we want to just show the relative concentration of public toilets around
Something a bit more like this?
Okay, cool. So this is showing us, what's this showing us, Luke?
This is using Fusion tables to just generate a heat map instead. So, this is just going to render some tiles, which are much quicker, send down to the browser, and we'd see much more of a concentration of the information.
So this is useful if I want to see, what sort of areas I need to hang around if I need a lot of public toilets around me.
Yeah. And here's another project I've been working on. What do you think about it?
Okay, this is okay, but what's this? What's this doing?
I like to track zombies as well.
You're tracking zombies?
Yeah, so here are all my zombies, and they're kind of coming towards this mall.
But I already have a mental model of what zombies are like, Luke. And these aren't really matching my mental model of what a zombie looks like.
Would this help?
Ah, see, that looks better. See, that's scary. I wouldn't necessarily be scared if I just saw a bunch of markers around. I just think there was a lot of Google I/Os going.
A giant marker comes to eat your brains?
Yeah, not scary. I just think, yeah. Okay, yeah, but this is a lot better. This is, matching more up with my expectations. I've been working on a similar site. It's for tracking ninjas. That was a really big laugh, and I'm actually kind of disappointed we got a laugh because we used the exact same joke in our talk last year. So obviously people weren't paying attention last year, or they haven't watched it on YouTube.
Yeah. So moving on. If controlling the map is done badly, the user experience sucks.
See, this is getting very negative, Luke.
I'm not a negative person, man.
You're not a negative person, but you're talking about sucking and doing things badly. Can we maybe switch it up a bit?
All right, what about if we do this? If the controlling the map is done well, the user experience rocks.
All right. Let's make the user experience rock.
That's what we're here for.
Okay. So controlling the map, this is actually how the user interacts with the map itself. And this is really getting at matching up with people's expectations. There are a lot of mapping sites out there, but they all have a sort of similar way of interacting with the map, how you can actually do things. And if you break their mental model of how to do this and their expectations, then it's going to really suck. I'm still talking negative.
Yeah,
but if you do it right, it's going to rock.
It will rock. And this isn't saying that you don't have to just design something cool and just follow what everyone does. It's just thinking about what people are used to, and kind of you can make things kind of cooler and a bit better, but you don't want to make people really think too hard about what they have to do, because then it's just going to become more of a problem than
exactly. And this is simple things. This is like making the interactions obvious. Make it obvious what you can actually interact with, making your controls consistent. That's particularly the case for a mobile device where you don't have cues like, if you mouse over something and the hand turns into a click,
Yeah, and it's stuff like, so having all the buttons the same size. So just by visually looking at it what is a button and what isn't. And you're making them bigger so you can touch it with your finger or with your dialing wand.
Yeah, I have really, really fat fingers, so I need a dialing wand for my...
And it's things like removing functionality. You don't want to remove functionality, you just kind of want to just simplify it.
And that goes back to naivety again, right? If people often build a great desktop application, and then to make a mobile version, they just rip out the guts of the application, right? They make it a lot simpler, but they've actually removed a lot of the stuff that you can do in the desktop app, and you don't want to do that.
No, you don't want to dumb it down, you just want to simplify.
Exactly.
So here's, again, the maps example. We're going to use this quite a bit. On the desktop version, we have the map type control up top right, where you hover over and it expands out. A lot of people have seen that. We've got the overview map control down the bottom, and we've got a slider for the nav. We've got all these cool things we can interact with, and we don't have to be told to interact with. We can just kind of explore the interface with our mouse.
And make it easy for the user to explore it. Yep.
And then on mobile, you see we've got bigger buttons. We can just look at this and easily see what is a button and what isn't, what we can kind of interact with.
Exactly. The key point here is that we've got a consistent scheme for everything that the user can interact with. So it's easy to drag the map around because that's kind of intuitive. But then all of the buttons, they're styled the same way. They're really obvious that these are buttons. These are something you can click on with your dialing wand.
So responsiveness. This is a key thing. If the responsiveness is done well, the user experience rocks.
And this is getting into something that people often might overlook in terms of usability.
So it's about not breaking the mental model. If you're panning a map with a touch device, if you suddenly start doing all this computation and just doing lots of weird things, it just won't feel like it's sticking to your hand, and people just will get kind of confused what they're doing.
Exactly. A map is a physical thing in people's minds, right? And so if you're dragging it around, especially on a tablet device, it feels really good when it actually, interacts with your fingers the way it's meant to, right? And if you have a lot of latency, if you have a lot of delay, if you have a lot of lag in the way that it does, then it really breaks people's mental model and it really, really frustrates them.
Yeah, so we had a couple of demos that show this. So here's a common thing that we see people use. They'll put all their data on the map, and then when someone pans around, they'll get rid of every marker and then load it and then put it back. And you kind of just forget what's happening. So if I pan the map, you see the markers disappear, pop in, and even if you move a little bit, so there was a mark on the left, it went away, and I'm kind of confused and a bit scared.
So this is when you're re-querying your data to update it when a user drags the map, which you might want to do, right? Because you need to show the new data where the user has dragged and so forth.
Yeah. But then instead, doing some simple things like keeping the markers around and then just getting rid of them when they're not in screen anymore. So this just feels like just a much more fluid interaction with it. I can see the markers. If I go too fast and I saw something was there, I can go back and it's still there, and it just feels better.
It feels better. And this is another example. This is putting an overlay onto the map. And this is a great image I found of the 15th century Augsburg in Germany.
How big is this image, Jez?
That image that's about 5 megabytes, and I just found it. I decided, oh yeah, I'm going to plonk that on a map, and this is going to be great. But
that doesn't work too well.
It's just really laggy when you drag it around. So you've got to make sure that, and of course you're taking up our Australian bandwidth too if you do this.
Yeah.
You know, don't want
and I got to use that bandwidth to find ponies.
Yeah, exactly. So instead, what you can do, make sure that you get your overlays to the proper resolution, a resolution you can actually render. And this one we're actually using KML to render this as well.
Yeah, so that just moves a lot better. It's just a lot more easy to interact with. You know, I don't feel like I'm waiting for something.
Exactly.
So good shout out to Speedy Maps.
Shout out. Yeah, so there's a great talk on tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. straight after the keynote, which is going to go into this particular thing about making your map speedy, making it responsive in a lot more detail.
Yeah, going right down to the DOM level sort of thing.
Exactly. So go check it out.
So if the storage is done well, the user experience rocks. I mean, people don't really think of storage when it comes to user experience, Jez.
But storage, I mean, you've got data that you're representing, that you're putting on the map. And if you do it badly, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So we want to make sure that we're using reliable sources for our data, using reliable infrastructure to put our data on the map, and so forth. So we're going to take you through some examples of Google infrastructure that is great for serving and storing your data, and so you can make the user experience rocks.
Yeah, so it's stuff like reliability, always having your data up if someone's put the data on your site, for them being able to get it back. If they put something there, if they refresh the page, they kind of expect it to be there.
Exactly. Latency, of course, if you have your data homed in a single database in Reykjavik, then it's not going to be very useful outside Iceland, right?
Unless there's a volcano.
Unless there's a volcano. Well, that's going to be even worse, right? Then everyone else in the world is going to start looking at your site, your Icelandic site.
You had one that was about, what was it called?
The volcano?
Yeah.
Yeah, you pronounced it the other day, I'm pretty sure.
It had 7 Ds in it, that's all I know.
And of course, editability. So, if you want to have your data editable, then there's some key things you can do to get that up and running.
Yeah, so we like Google products, so we thought we'd use a couple of Google products in these examples. What was this one, Jez?
So this is a really simple example. This is just serving some KML directly from App Engine. And this is just serving a static KML file. But once you've got harnessing the power of App Engine, you can actually do a lot of cool things. You can actually write an application to source data from users and so forth like that, and then serve it in a way as KML or as JSON or however you like, so you can actually render it on the map.
And I've been talking about my pony tracker, so here it is.
Okay, this is, yeah, cool, all right. So this is an example of editability, if you've got a crowdsourced solution. And App Engine might be a bit heavyweight for what you're interested in.
So with this, I've just used Google Spreadsheets, and that has a JSON-P callback, so you can query a database, a spreadsheet for some data, and it will come back in JSON, and then you can put it on the map. And you said you saw a pony the other day.
I did see a pony the other day.
Where did you see it?
It was at Bondi Beach. I don't know why I was at Bondi Beach, because I'm not a British backpacker, but occasionally native Sydneysiders do actually go to Bondi Beach, believe it or not.
So there you go. Was that where it is?
Yeah, great. Okay, so this is fantastic. So this is just adding a row to a spreadsheet, and then we're querying that to get the location.
Yeah, and spreadsheets is really easy for people to interact with, and it's kind of nice.
Really simple solution.
So you know, I know you didn't like my toilet tracker that much, so I made a better version for you, Jez. Do you like this?
Okay. What's this doing, Luke?
So this is just querying Fusion tables based using their radius search. And I can just say, given this point and this within this radius of this, go query all the toilets.
Cool.
It's pretty easy for you when you're at the pub.
Fantastic. Yeah, of course, you know, I often need to run off very quickly. Yeah, fantastic. And the great thing about Fusion tables, of course, is the geospatial query.
Yes, you can just put all your data up there and just query it, and it'll be easy and simple.
Awesome.
So if sharing is done well, the user experience rocks.
Cool. So let's talk a bit about sharing and what we actually mean by sharing. So it's not just, so you think about sharing, you think about sharing something that you've created with other people, but it's also sharing between devices as well.
With yourself.
Exactly.
So if you're on the desktop and you've done something and then you want to be able to share it to your phone and go between the planning and active stage.
Absolutely.
So it's, you know, then being able to go to your website or go to your mapping application, interact with it, kind of save your state or wherever you were, share it on Gmail or Buzz or any other social tool out there.
And of course, once you've done that, once you can share it between your devices, you can also share it with other people. You know, this is about planning as well. It's about interactive and, you know, sharing it wherever else you can share it.
So here's an example that's quite common. You know, you were going to find your backpackers from Sydney down at Bondi Beach. So if you're on the desktop, you kind of did a query, you may have just dragged it around to go past it.
Right, well, see, but I'm looking here, you know, I want to change this because this is going by the Cross-City Tunnel. And the Cross-City Tunnel is really, really expensive. It's like $7 to use the Cross-City Tunnel.
Was that like 30 US now?
Yeah, I think so, 30 or 40, yeah, something like that. So, you know, we might have manipulated this a bit, and we want to send the exact directions we found during the planning stage and send them to our mobile device, so when we get the active stage, we get something like this.
Yeah, a bit like this. So, as we said, you know, you got your map and your content. You can kind of switch back between the two, and it's gone to the active stage. You know, we can easily change the directions. We're out in the world. We can kind of see where we are. But it's just going between the two, not changing the experience, just making it better for the device that it's on.
Exactly.
So we'll give another shout out.
So we were going to talk a bit about social sharing and things like that, but there's a much better talk about it tomorrow afternoon, location-based app development. And this is using the recently announced Places API.
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting.
At 3 p.m. tomorrow, go check it out.
So if map styling is done well, the user experience rocks.
Okay, and we can't really talk about map styling, or we could, but we have someone way better to talk about map styling.
So we'd like to invite Justin up here.
So this
41
is,
Latitude.
And he's going to talk about how styling the map well can give a great user experience. Good job. Good job.
You guys did a great job. I don't know, I'm going to tap that up here all alone. As they said, if the controls are bad, the user experience sucks. If the sharing is bad, if the storage is bad, if it's not responsive, the user experience sucks. But if the styling is bad, it's also going to suck. It's going to suck a lot. So what I want to talk about is how to style maps. Specifically, if you're styling a map for the purpose of data overlays, a mashup, anything like that, how you want to style it so that your users know what the map is about. And this, it's kind of written as a companion piece to this post that I wrote in October. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but I explained different options you have and with the different styling. And there are a lot of samples here. If you want ideas for styling or if you want to know kind of what you can do, this is a good starting point. But we're going to go ahead and to summarize that article, there's basically 3 things you can do to Google Maps. You can remove things, usually piece by piece. You can remove everything if you want. You can remove different select things. You can simplify a couple of things, but that's mainly limited to the roads and also the cities. And you can also pretty much change the color of everything, which I don't always recommend that you do, but you can. So the goal of all this is your data. It's not really the map. If you're overlaying data, you want your data to be front and center. You don't want unnecessary map elements in the way. You want to show off your data. So I want to show some examples of some really good mashups that the styling was really effective at putting the data forward. These first styles mainly removed map elements or they simplified them. So my first example is a mashup called Maploid. And that sounds very strange. What that is if you go to the site, this is the number of jobs currently available in each state. And I don't know how they know that, but they have, jobs, and it looks like Texas has the most jobs right now, so if you're unemployed, you might want to run there. But what's good about this is how much they removed. So let's look closely at the map, and you see the data, and you see the outlines of the states. The whole point of this site is just to show you how many jobs there are in each state. So if they had left all this on, you wouldn't, it's not as clear. They made it much more effective, much better presentation, removing things like cities, roads. I don't think there's park names on that one. But it's very effective. It's much easier to read without all that stuff on the map. Now there's, next example here is this beautiful, beautiful example from the New York Times that they did for the 2010 census here in the United States. On this map here, this is the population change from the year 2000 to the year 2010. The blue counties are counties that gained population, and the kind of tan counties are counties that lost population. Like the Maploid mashup, they removed a significant amount of the data on the map. Cities, roads, all of that's out of the way, so you can get a great picture of the data. The data's front and center, and that's what you see. There's nothing getting in the way of it. As you zoom in, still the data. It looks beautiful. Nothing really in the way. And then, as you keep zooming in, cities are added for reference points, but there's no highways, because who's going to be using this to find driving directions to grandma's house? No one. This is a map of population change, so you don't need that. It's really beautiful. You zoom in a little more. Roads show up, but they're simplified. These are the simplified roads. They don't have casings. There's no signage for the roads. There's no highway shields. There's no text. It's all very plain so that the data can come forward. Here's side by side what Google Maps normally looks like and what their mashup looks like. And you can kind of see all that they took off. It's really stunning. Data's just front and center. Now one more mashup I want to show you, and this is the prettiest one. This is truly a price reduction map. It's real estate prices and how quickly they fell. And with this, they removed everything. Everything except the state boundaries and the lakes and the oceans. And it is gorgeous. It's a really pretty map. The data is just front and center. It leaves a very memorable, compelling impact on anybody who sees it. And instead of having city names or anything like that on here, it's just divided into zip code tracks. And you simply hover over, and you can see the information. You can locate your city. And they've also put a search dialog up there that you could use to jump to a certain city. But this is really beautiful and really compelling. Now let's talk a little bit about changing colors, which this is very easy to abuse, but I'm going to show you some masterful examples of this. The first one I want to show you is also from the New York Times. They seem to have a really good graphic department over there. This one is regarding ethnicity populations within urban areas, or I actually think it's of the whole US. The dots on the map, the different colored dots signify the different ethnicities, and they have muted everything on this map so that the only color you see, other than the water of course, are the ethnicities. You don't see anything here. You don't see parks, you don't see anything of color. The roads aren't colored, nothing. You see the data. It's very clear. Easy to make patterns, easy to browse. It's really beautiful. One more shot, and the impact that it has is just amazing. If they had colored the roads, you wouldn't see, the data would not stand out as much. One more example, and all the gray, it really works well. This is a different mashup. This is from the Wall Street Journal. This is their guide to the New York Marathon, and it was also a guide to the San Francisco, Chicago, and Boston Marathon. What they did here is they took the roads and they made them all white so that the path of the marathon is incredibly clear here. You see the whole path. There's nothing competing with it. Here's their map of the San Francisco Marathon. And it's just, there's nothing there getting in the way. You see really clearly where the path of this is. Really well done. Now, this technique is very widespread. Google uses it in their own bicycle maps. When you turn the bicycle layer on, all the roads turn white, and the bike paths and trails are overlaid in green. It allows you to see very clearly where all the bicycle paths are. If you're making a mashup of any kind of trail, any kind of route, anything like that, consider making the roads, if your mashup isn't important for automobile navigation, consider making the roads all white, because the impact is really good. I want to share with you just a couple of tips that may help improve some mashups you may be working on or may be working on in the future. The first tip is don't be afraid to take stuff off the map. I'm serious about this. Don't be afraid to. Case in point, this mashup here. I ran into this mashup for the first time the other day. It's a weather mashup. And what it's doing here is there are little boxes there with temperature numbers in them. But it's very hard when you look at this to see the temperature numbers because they left the route numbers on. And you see the route numbers, and it competes with the temperature numbers. You can't really glance at this map and see the temperatures without also seeing the roads. There's all these numbers on here kind of looking you in the face, and you've got to really discern what's a temperature, what's a route number. Don't be afraid to take stuff off the map. I don't think anybody's going to be using this temperature map to find their way home or to find directions to Google I/O in San Francisco or anything remotely like that. Another example from the same site is these, I don't know if you can even see them. They're these white labels. They made the labels for the parks on this map white, which I thought was a very unusual decision. You can barely read it. And I just wonder, instead of making them white like that, why not just take the parks off? I mean, it's a weather map. I don't know how important the parks would be. Obviously, cities should be left on, but the parks, I don't know. Very hard to read. However, one point I wanted to make with this is don't hesitate to remove the map's roads if your mashup has nothing to do with navigation. The roads always seem to set kind of the color for the map. If the roads are red, your map will kind of look pink from far away. If your roads are yellow or orange, your map will kind of look yellow from far away. And that'll compete with your data, especially depending on what color it is. Here's a good example here. This map has clearly no roads, and it doesn't need them. It's simply for showing employment information or the number of jobs in all these states. That was a good decision to leave them off. But you have to be very careful. These are examples that I'm going to show you of things that I've actually seen in the wild, which is very perplexing. Here's the first one. Yeah. And there was data on top of here, so kind of confusing. Let's go to another one. I guess you're supposed to find the cities based on how big the dots are. I mean, I can kind of tell where like Sacramento and San Francisco are, but this was a hard one to follow. I can't remember what data they had on it, but it was, I don't know. I've seen this quite a few times. I don't know. Maybe there was a reason. This one too. I think this one I've seen the most. So this, by the way, this is what not to do. Just so your users can understand your map. Another thing that I want to encourage you to do is to sketch out your ideas. It helps me a lot. You know, play with it, play around with your ideas. This is a good tool for doing that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but you can manipulate the little map there, change all sorts of things. You can take everything off, change the colors. There's also another tool that I like to use. This one allows you to do it full screen. If you want to see how the map would look, taking up the whole screen, this is actually a good solution. This is scribblemaps.com. And you'll be, as soon as you land on the site, you'll see this dialog box right there. You press on the style map and there'll be a dialog. You can basically do anything with the map. Take everything off, put everything on, make all the roads look like Skittles. Whatever you want to do. And with that, I'm going to invite the other two gentlemen to come back up. We'll answer whatever questions you have. Thanks. Thanks for coming.
So if you've got questions, if you just come to the mic. Yes, we have one in the back.
Where would you guys fit tablets into the desktop mobile paradigm?
The question is, where would we fit tablets into the desktop mobile area?
That's a really interesting question because you've got more screen real estate, but you don't necessarily have the processing power, the bandwidth. So you've got to make those decisions, side by side on a case-by-case basis.
I think it's about your app. If you're doing something that's kind of more mobile-ish, like someone's got something where I'm going to be out in the world and you try and aim more towards a mobile experience. But if you're doing more of a searching, a planning sort of stuff, you might try to be able to shift all the data around the place and scroll.
And another key point to remember is to not necessarily think of this as a dichotomous thing. Don't necessarily think of it being desktop versus mobile, because then, as you say, where does a tablet fit into this? Think about it in terms of the capabilities of the device that a user is viewing it on.
Thank you.
Hi. Actually, is there anything planned for speed improvements in terms of local caching? Actually, there's the second question. What is being done by you guys in terms of vector-based rendering of the map tiles or text on the map?
So the question is, what are we doing about vector-based map tiles in the API?
And the answer is we can't comment on any future plans or anything like that, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry, that's a non-answer.
It's a good question, though.
It is a good question.
Yes?
I thought I saw some 3D mapping in the honeycomb demos where a certain gesture would open up a different type of map. Could you comment on that and if that's available for a desktop display?
So the question was, on the honeycomb tablet that you've got the new maps where it's all 3D and you can spin around and use gestures and those sort of things. That won't be as part of the API. It's not delivered at the moment as part of an API sort of thing. It kind of relates to the vector style of maps. And I don't think you can, at the moment, incorporate that mapping into a native application on the Android. Yes, oh, sorry, but on desktop, well, that's part of the API and those sort of things, and the answer is not yet.
Not at the moment.
When adding different types of layers, such as KML and then other types of custom overlays, you can't change the Z-index or whatever of the KML to put it underneath your other layers, causing quite a big issue if you want to have a mashup of different types of data. Is that something you guys are planning on fixing? And one other small thing, are you planning on sorting, at the moment KML behaves very differently in Google Earth to on the maps. You lose a lot of functionality, and in fact we've had to pull it from our site because it was actually quite buggy in terms of displaying a large set of polygon data, and you would click on one polygon and it would actually show data for the other polygon.
You want to repeat the question?
let me get back up. So there was two parts of the question. First part was whether it's possible to reorder the layering that's done, so you can move KML, for example, right down to the bottom.
I'm not 100% sure. If you see me after, we'll be able to find out for you.
And second part of the question was about
KML differences between API and Earth.
Yes. So KML was obviously written for Earth, and we only support a subset of the features for it. It doesn't really make sense for most of the mapping applications to support the full subset because it just includes things that don't make sense on a two-dimensional map. But that being said, who knows? We can't really comment on future things that might be coming up.
I mean, if there's anything in particular, you can file a feature request or bug about specific bugs, and then we can look at it.
That's probably a good point to bring up the group. If you have questions, if you have feature requests, file them on the group, and that's where we sort of look at things to do next.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Any other questions?
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.